My name is Barbara Rogers Chow, and this video is intended to be a personal history video where basically I just tell you all about myself and how I became who I am today. Um, like I said, my name is Barbara Rogers Chow. I'm an educator. I am a Spanish teacher. I have taught Spanish as a high school teacher and a professor for almost 25 years. Happy and beautiful profession. I consider myself to be an educator, a researcher, an advocate for linguistic, cultural, and social rights, which I'm happy to do, which I believe is needed. My introduction into society, I believe, was highly untraditional, maybe perhaps unique to some. I was born to multiracial parents in San Francisco, California. I was adopted by an African American family in the Deep South, Alabama, years later. I spent a lifetime basically searching for the space that I could belong, because in many aspects there was always a question of belonging no matter which environment I was in. So when it talks about looking through your adult lens at yourself, at your life, through my adult lens, I look at my childhood, yes, as a happy childhood, but one full of questions and emotional turmoil, feeling like, where do I belong? And I think a lot of us have questions like that. In some circles, I simply wasn't black enough. In other circles, I wasn't Latina enough, or certainly not white enough. And in many cases, I just felt like, where do I belong? I'm always surprised when the world is content to identify people into a box. And it finds comfort in that label, oddly enough. For many, that box of cultural or racial ethnicity, it provides legitimacy and understanding for others. And it makes them comfortable because they know the box. They understand what is entailed within that cultural box or that ethnic box. But for those people who simply don't fit in the box at all, on any level, linguistic, ethnic, and we can continue on, it creates an uncomfortable bit. I don't even know the word. It's almost like a level of uncomfortability. It just makes people uneasy because you don't fit into what they thought they understood about a particular race or a particular ethnic group or a particular culture. And it creates a moment of fear, of confusion for the other, not necessarily the person who doesn't fit in the box. They're just living life, sometimes living their best life. But it creates confusion and fear for others because they cannot define you. And when people feel like they cannot define a group, there's always fear in what you don't understand. In the section where it says describe your culture today, what parts of your young adult lens still describe you? I would say my culture today is just one that I have made it. My entire journey throughout my life was basically moving back and forth between the West Coast in California, living in LA, living in San Francisco, living in hours north of San Francisco, which is a very unique location, not big city at all, very small town. And then moving in between those circles at the same time, living in Birmingham, Alabama, living in Montgomery, Alabama, living in the South, living in Georgia, and having unique experiences in every single location. And I'm just to the point where, I feel like I am my culture and I have to represent whatever that means because it is a hodgepodge of different things. And I just have to be that for my kids. There is nothing to point to that says that is us. That's our background. Nope. My children they have understood that they are culture. And sometimes culture can't be defined. It's simply, sometimes you cannot define um, culture and linguistic, uh, you just, sometimes you just, like I said, you can't put people in the box, okay? Um, let's talk about acculturation. Acculturation, according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, it is the cultural modification of an individual, group, or people by adapting to or borrowing traits from another culture. It's a merging of cultures as a result of prolonged contact. Um, but I look at, I read another definition in the Oxford Dictionary, which says it's the assimilation to a different culture, typically the dominant one. And I look at it as kind of the words that aren't said. Acculturation, which can easily sound beautiful, it's like a power struggle. That's the unspoken word. There is a power struggle there. And somebody is giving up something in order to attain a culture, not just for the fun of it, but in order to survive in that circle, in that society, in that location. So, yes, we would love to believe that it's a beautiful merging of cultures and languages, but that is not always the case, and history has shown us that. When it comes to ethnic culture, ethnicity, racial identity, nationality, I identify myself as American. That one I have no questions about. I do know that I was born in the U.S., so at least I do have some clarification on that. But in terms of ethnic backgrounds, my parents were a mixture of a lot of different things. I know that there is a mixture of, there's white, there's black, there's Chinese, from what I understand, there's Puerto Rican, there's just a hodgepodge of different things. And so it's hard to just tack on. I do speak Spanish. So it's kind of like you just don't fit in anyone's box. And it took decades for me to understand that that was okay. And my children, they're, they have me, which is a mixture of so many things, and their father is from China. So they definitely walk through the world sometimes feeling very confused. They hear Spanish, they hear Chinese, they don't fit into anyone's box. Um, my children have been pulled aside in school because the teacher, who I guess was instructed to mark every race of every child for the census, they just couldn't figure out what my children were. So they would literally, are you Mexican? Are you Filipino? They throw out 1,000 things, and my children were just, I guess they had never really confronted having to fit into just one category. And they would very proudly, and I hope continue to proudly say, I'm very mixed. Very, very mixed. And I may not be in anyone's box because you really can't define what we are. How does your ethnicity, racial identity, and nationality differ from your students? I will say this, the first 17 years of my teaching career, I taught in a small town by the name of Oak Grove. It was a beautiful experience. Very small town, 99% white. I didn't know that a town in America had existed like that. but apparently there are places like that. The school itself, at the time that I taught there, um, let me preface that the town itself was 100% Caucasian. The school was 99% white, with a 1% that was just every once in a while someone's mixed grandchild coming to the school. There were no Asians, there were no Hispanic students, there were almost no black students. Um, if I taught 150 students in a semester, I might have one African American student, maybe two. In that example, in that moment, during those almost 2 decades of that, I never felt uncomfortable. I was happy. I believed that I was breaking barriers. I was giving them a face of the other and showing them what you thought you knew about whatever race you don't know. Here I am. I'm here. And I'm showing you that you can't put people in a box and you can't think they're all like this, because here I am. And I remember all the time feeling like I needed to be on my best always, because I didn't want to feed into any stereotypes. I wanted them to question their belief in stereotypes. And I thought I had a purpose, and that was my purpose. Unfortunately, during the first Trump administration, um, that experience kind of came to a halt, because my students, who were awesome and amazing, all of a sudden it became like a mass crowd of build the wall, and in the lunchroom eating, and there's just this mass love of build the wall, and send them all back. And it, even somebody who didn't fit into one single box, it made me question so many things. And it made me question my purpose of what I had thought I had brought to the community, of showing them a different side. Um, so there are still questions about that whole experience, but I don't regret all of my years. I consider it a beautiful experience, up until the very end. And I do believe I made an impact. And I know I can see it, because I've had students from those decades come back to me years later and say, you did impact my life, and you did show me a different side. And, maybe they had come from a racist parentage, and yet I opened their eyes to people are different, and you can't just assume who they are. And the funny thing is, after that experience, I moved to another school that was predominantly, most a very mixed school, but mostly Hispanic, African American, and mixed, with also white students throughout there. So a very mixed school. And I find myself also feeling like I have to take on the mantle of role model and show them, hey, you can get out of, whatever it is you feel that you are experiencing, whether it's economic poverty or social disadvantages or etc. You can get out of there, and you can make your own way and make your own life and create your own happiness and generate success. So it is possible, and I'm standing here as an example. So when I look at the world, I just realized, at some point, you have to wake up and you have to decide you're not going to fit into anybody's box. You're going to be who you are, and you're going to be proud of whatever that is, whatever that entails. Um, and you just have to be you. So I'm looking forward to this particular class, and the discussions that me and my research colleagues will have, because we are going to be breaking barriers by talking about things that people are just silent about, as though it will fix itself. It's not going to fix itself. You have to have an open dialogue, and you have to be able to talk and speak and not be afraid to say certain things. And you can't solve a problem that you're not willing to discuss. So I hope to be a good assistance in solving problems like that. Thank you for listening to this video.